Now you're on.
All right, it is 4 p.m. We will call the Committee on Public Safety to order. Please note that all members of the committee are present. If I could have a motion to approve the minutes from June 10th.
I'm going to make a motion. The only thing is I'm going to ask that we amend the minutes. Andy's last name is Markovic. So yeah, so it's Markowicz throughout, but it's actually Markovic.
Doesn't sign in, so.
Oh, he doesn't. Got it. Okay.
AR,
So it's Markovic.
guys.
Yeah, but other than that,
Okay, and with that correction, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Minutes are accepted. Next, we are on to public comment on agenda items for up to 3 minutes. Do we have any members of the public in the room? We may have some folks online.
Just have to unmute myself.
Okay, just a moment. And because you are virtual, you are not able to sign in on our sheet. But you do have 3 minutes for public comment. And if you would like to go ahead and state your name, please, and go forward with your public comment. Is it Allie Peeler with your hand raised? If you could unmute yourself, please.
Jack, can you unmute her?
I have her mic enabled. She just has to unmute it.
Hello, Allie, if you can. Okay. We do have another individual logged in. Would you be interested in public comment at this time? Oh, that is you.
Yep.
Okay. Seeing as we had a member of the public who.
Oh, here we go. She's waiting in the lobby.
Okay. Hello, Allie, are you with us?
Oh, no, she's muted.
I just enabled her mic on her end. She has to unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Perfect.
Go ahead. And you will have 3 minutes for public comment.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
You can.
Perfect. The reason I'm here is I would like to request a change to the existing noise ordinance for Lansing. Right now, it's a requirement that an officer actually witness the noise event, and that's kind of crazy. As busy as they are, it's virtually impossible and totally unreasonable to expect an officer to stop what they're doing and go on a noise complaint call when it's typically somebody over partying or I don't know, doing something stupid. I would like to add to the ordinance, if you don't want to take that out completely, that we can use audio video security cameras. There's already a system in place called SCRAM, Axum, AXOM, that the police use to upload that evidence for criminal cases or other cases. And there's absolutely no reason why we can't use that same thing for noise ordinance violations and deal with that offline rather than having officers stop their important work and deal with the noise problem. So I didn't need my whole 3 minutes. That's why I'm here.
Thank you very much for your comment. We appreciate that. And I believe you were the only member of public to enter a public comment. We will move on to item 5B, presentations from the Lansing Police Department. If you would like to take a seat at the table so we can further these discussions. We're going to go just right down the list of discussion topics as it concerns LPD. I know that I believe the city attorney's office was aware of some of these items and may, want to also, offer positions on behalf of OCA. I did believe we were going to have a representative from EDP here, but I don't believe anyone is here at this time. So we will go on to the first item, which is red tag violations. There it has been brought to my attention, and I won't speak for anyone else on the committee, but it has been brought to my attention that at times there are people who are essentially living in red tagged homes. And according to the red tag itself, and it isn't very clear on this, but we do have an image of the red tag. It references chapter 1460 of the codified ordinances that the building is deemed unsafe. And so it'd be a misdemeanor to occupy or to allow a pet or person to live in the structure. And then it goes on to list some of the parameters around that, fines, penalties, violations, and such. And so what I guess what my question would be for LPD, and you certainly can talk about how you deal with the red tagged structures. But I've been informed at times that folks are inhabiting, occupying these spaces and not necessarily removed by LPD. That you don't just show up and take people out of there without some other type of work being conducted. And so I'd like to know from your perspective and your policies, how you would typically handle someone that you find living in a red tag property.
Sure. So the Lansing Police Department's response is going to be based off of public safety or support of code enforcement. Typically, those are our two most common reasons why we would respond. And obviously, like you stated, these houses have been deemed to be uninhabitable for one reason or another. And those reasons, without getting, into EDP's lane, those reasons can stem from very minor violations to extreme violations, of water turned off or fire damage, stuff like that. So for us, we look at these as a nuisance, nonviolent call that we respond to. Like you stated, essentially it's a trespassing violation, right? So it's a nonviolent misdemeanor crime. The caveat for us is that these folks are allowed to be inside of these houses during business hours. So from 8 to 5, they're allowed to be inside to do repairs to said violations. So that throws a different little monkey wrench into our officers' response when it comes to that. So for these types of crimes like this, our officers rely heavily on their discretion. And when it comes to discretionary, what they look at is obviously, like I stated, what type of infraction it is. Is it something very minor? Is it something very major? Is that house renter occupied versus owner occupied? So the important thing to know with that is if it's renter occupied, that renter is essentially at the will of the owner to make those repairs for violations. So that's a big piece for us. And then the other big piece is the availability of other housing, right? So do we want to be kicking folks out of housing if there's a minor violation, if there's no other place for those folks to go? So those are just some of the things that the officers will look at when it comes to we want to or choose to enforce that trespassing misdemeanor violation. So every call, I would dare to say, for a red tagged response is going to be different. There's going to be small little caveats to each of those responses that's going to determine whether or not the officers do take enforcement. And in the notes, we talked about the one specific address that came up on Shepherd Street. So we can talk about that a little bit if you'd like to.
That would be great. Sure.
So that was, again, a different scenario. So that house that we're talking about was set for demolition. Typically, we don't run into people still occupying those houses when it comes that close to the demolition process. This case, this owner did not want to leave. So code requested LPD's response out there. And again, it's during business hours. So what the claims, I won't speak to what the claims were between the owner and the officers as far as what he was actually doing out there. But nonetheless, there was a disagreement on whether or not he was to leave or not. So our officers used their discretion, and when they finally did come down to giving a direct order, listen, either you leave or be arrested, this guy left. So he did end up following orders, which in the end, that's what we want is compliance voluntarily. Because again, we don't want to put our officers or the citizens in danger of any sort of physical altercation over essentially a trespassing complaint. So in the end, that subject did indeed comply.
Okay, thank you.
So just quickly, because I'm very familiar with this situation. So what happened after that? He complied, and then I was sitting in the car with the director of EDP at the time, and he came back. What do we do then? I mean, is it just a start over again with the situation?
Again, it's tough to answer. I wasn't out there. I don't know the intimate details of each. I know that we were out there on multiple different occasions.
Correct.
And typically, that's a building block of when we would take enforcement on something like that is if it's a repeat call or repeat offense that we're gonna go out there. Is this a problem that, you know, is ultimately going to be solved by enforcement?
You know, if I may,
Please.
one of the things I have noticed, you know, like, so we had 1213 East Kalamazoo last summer. I'm sure the chief's familiar with this. Like, I think we called 15 times the same night. They just kept breaking in. And they kept letting them go, and it went on for months like this. I think that's maybe a really bad example of not putting our foot down. But then Sunday, we had an issue where a neighbor called with the red tag. Someone was, you know, on the property. And LPD had come out and told them they can't be there. They didn't listen. And then when I called about the issue, because the neighbor next door has lung cancer and they're burning stuff, you know, the officer came out and said, you got to go and I'm going to wait till you leave, which is perfect. I think the perfect resolution to that situation. So I hope that we can see more. And I don't know because I'm not everywhere all the time, but I think that is the right type of resolution where it's, okay, I told you once, you didn't leave. Now we're going to wait for you to leave.
I don't disagree with you at all that 15 times in one day is an excessive amount. That
It's
should
wasting
not
your
have
guys' time.
It is. And that's where it needs to be realized is if we would have done that on call number 2 or call number 3 or call number 10, that's alleviating additional calls for service, which is part of what we're trying to do is reduce calls for service. So yeah, I don't disagree with you one bit.
I appreciate it. That's all my questions are.
Yeah, just in terms of after hours and on weekends with regard to the red tag. So, and I certainly appreciate the idea of officer's discretion. But of course, we want that discretion to be informed, right? So what does if it's at night or on the weekends, what does coordination look like or communication look like with maybe our on-call code officer? And then what does the communication with HRCS look like for services and support?
So after hours, obviously everything that we do after hours is more difficult.
Right.
It would be extreme cases that I think we would probably call HRCS after hours. We've done that for fires, displacements of that kind of nature. But for red tags, I don't think that our cops are going to call HRCS. And
So I guess my question though is how do they go out there and determine whether this red tag is minor, is it major? Are we communicating with our
Yes.
code office?
Correct.
So that would be the on-call.
So there was a report that was generated daily.
Right.
Was a nightmare. It wasn't getting updated. Our officers were getting poor information because for an IT reason that I can't speak to, it just didn't work out. So the idea of that, I think, to have the most available up-to-date information at the fingertips of our cops is the most important thing to have.
Right.
So we're making those informed decisions. So it's definitely something that we can improve on.
Okay. But if it is determined to be major, then the communication with HRCS would be, I would assume, direct with the director. Info. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I do have a question about some of the things that you've outlined, and thank you for that. I mean, very thorough explanation. But this will probably be a theme for me as we go down the list of items here to discuss. I understand that utilizing discretion is a very important tool for our officers. Like you said, with red tag housing, you name it, whatever situation you're dealing with, it's going to be different than the last and different from the next, right? So your officers need to be able to use discretion when they are working with the public, when they're, going into a variety of different situations. So when you say that an officer will use discretion when it comes to a red tag, can you explain to us if you have some sort of threshold? Like, you know, how, there could be minor instances all the way up to a health and safety hazard. At what point typically would you, you know, go into a structure or knock on a door where you believe someone is living there and say, okay, now we've met this criteria. Now we do need to act and make sure that this person is not within that structure.
Sure. So the other things that we're bound by is search and seizure. So to make forcible entry into these houses, we need to have, there's a set of probable cause that needs to be met to actually force our way in. So we could get there and the neighbor says, yep, that person's inside there. And if we can't, build our own case, and OCA can speak to this a little bit, if we can't build that case, we can't just go kick in the door. So getting back to your original question on what that threshold is, I think your threshold would be different than mine. It would be different than everybody's. In 22 years, I'm sure the chief can speak to that. We've seen the extreme to the very extreme. And I think that everybody's threshold would be a little bit different, whether or not they would step foot in there and say, no, this is absolutely uninhabitable.
Does OCA have any comments to that? Anything that you'd like to add?
I don't want to go into a deep dive into Fourth Amendment law here, but what the Assistant Chief is saying is absolutely correct. And there's all sorts of nuances and kind of twists and turns. And we have worked diligently with LPD. We've sent them, every time they have a question, we get answers to those specifics. Around red tagged properties, there is a point, I will say, right, where a property is so deteriorated to be considered, vacant and totally dilapidated. But that's only gonna be where there's, if you imagine a property kind of out of like a scary movie where it's totally open to like there's no doors, there's no windows, right? Someone in there isn't gonna have a right of privacy, but as with a lot of these houses, they aren't quite that decrepit. There is Fourth Amendment considerations to be made, and it being a misdemeanor violation, the restrictions on forcing entry and things like that are even greater than if this is, if we were talking about a serious felony like murder or something like that. So that is another kind of wrinkle that goes into this entire process.
Please.
Matt, so it's a misdemeanor to occupy or allow a person or a pet to occupy the structure, deface or remove this notice. Have we actually ever used that?
There are cases pending right now that I'm prosecuting for trespassing in a red tag. I would be willing to bet that there have been prosecutions for it in the past.
Okay.
The tough thing, right, is getting beyond that reasonable or beyond that burden that we have to meet of beyond a reasonable doubt, because when you get into these situations, you end up with a lot of he said, she said, and that becomes very tough in that very heightened criminal standard.
And then I guess the follow-up to that is allow a person. So have we gone after, we all know that there is a percentage of landlords that are really bad actors. Have we gone after them when they allow someone knowingly to, I know we're going after a certain landlord right now, but this part of it.
Sure, without getting into specifics on the kind of tactical side of things, so as not to tip our hand. Yes, I mean, we do, we certainly have advised EDP that when they're going out, try to form relationships with those tenants, try to get them to provide us the information we would need. And unfortunately, the people in those situations are not always the most trusting of authority, are a lot of times more concerned with just finding the place they're going to sleep that night. So it can be really hard to get the cooperation we need for a successful prosecution of that, allowing someone else to do it. Because right now we've added another layer we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is that allowing piece. And that's really tough. But yeah, we are constantly working to try to get the information we need and the cooperation from those people when we find them to follow through on that.
And I think it goes without saying, I don't think this committee is interested in throwing people on the streets, because I've heard that a couple times. I want to make that clear.
Right.
Like,
at all.
We're not, yeah, we're not looking to throw people out. We're just trying to understand this sticker a little better. Because I certainly think that there's a lot of confusion around this. And there's certainly a lot of moving pieces, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with President Cost and, you know, some of the questions that Councilman Hussein made as well. I mean, this is pretty nuanced, but what I don't want is for the community to not take these stickers seriously, to not take red tags seriously. It is a misdemeanor. There is a fine. There are penalties. Like everything else, we do have to move in accordance with the law, with our enforcement, with OCA. But these do need to be taken seriously because we do hear and see health and safety hazards fairly regularly in this committee. So I just want to ensure that we have a good understanding of the red tag, of how LPD works through them, EDP, you know, having their assessments, and then again with OCA. Any other questions or comments on this item?
I have one.
Please.
So, and this might be for LPD. When you call out code compliance on, like, you've removed someone from a house, is that call for a board up essentially?
Correct.
And when they do the board up, are they, and you might not be able to answer this, are they only boarding up like the doors that are unsecured that?
You know what? I don't know if I want to speak to what their procedure is on that. I know from just what I've seen, but I don't want to speak to their.
Okay.
I guess not knowing exactly what you want to, they don't get excessive. If they see a door that was forced entry or a window that's open, those are the only two things that they'll board up. They won't do every window in every house, in the entire house, but they will build on it. Like if someone goes back in there and you call them back out, then they'll go after that entry point. So you might end up getting there, but they're not excessive.
It's typically open and accessible. It's typically on the first floor.
Any other questions or comments on red tag? Okay, let's move on to the city's noise ordinance, chapter 654. Again, this is stemming from a resident concern. We actually did hear from this resident earlier in public comment. And I do want to ensure that this committee knows for the record, we do have a copy of an email thread listing out this resident's concern. It's been documented through our offices. And again, we're here to have a discussion, clarity on the noise ordinance from the perspective of, you know, now LPD and OCA. And I will get to the question of officer discretion. But typically, if you'd like to talk to us about when you receive noise ordinance complaints, how you move forward, how you make those determinations, and what your next steps are.
Sure. So I do want to make one thing clear. We've said the word discretion a lot, and I don't want that to be conceived or misunderstood as not being important. There's vastly different things, but these two types of calls for service are, again, nuisance calls. They're nonviolent. We have to look at, you know, resource allocation. Sometimes calls, you know, hold longer than others, you know, based on their priority level. So obviously we use our same sort of, I like to call it our common sense, right? Are we responding to a noise complaint at 2 o'clock in the afternoon where there's a barbecue and there's kids playing? Or are we responding to it at 2 a.m. at night and it's loud and obnoxious that can be heard throughout the entire neighborhood? So I think it's very important to realize that, again, every noise complaint we go on is different. Unfortunately, I've been on noise complaints I can speak personally to that has been a loud music complaint, and you can hear the chirping birds more than you can the music. So again, it comes down to discretion. And again, I'll let OCA speak to the ordinance, but sometimes this ordinance is a little bit vague on what we can and can't take enforcement on. It speaks to decibel levels. We don't carry decibel readers with us. So we really have to operate off of common sense. Can we hear this loud music or loud noise or TV or stereo, whatever it may be? Is it truly a disturbance? Is again, going back to that discretionary call of the officer. And we take all of those different factors in when we come to those decisions.
Just because you brought it up, what is a decibel reader? Is that a large piece of equipment? Is it something that would easily be available?
Google it.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that, a decibel reader.
Well,
Okay.
yeah,
It's an app. You can download it
An
on your
app?
devices. Yes.
Okay,
It reads the sound waves.
Our attorney from OCA, any comment on what we've heard so far about the noise ordinance? And then I do have a question for you.
Sure, I would just say, right again, when we're talking about these things and we're talking about them in the criminal context, it's important to always remember that beyond a reasonable doubt standard of proof that we have to bring, and we have to treat every case that's brought to us, either on a ticket or for a charging determination by our office. We have to look at it as if this is gonna go, this is gonna go to trial. And do I have the evidence that I need to be able to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt? And so like Assistant Chief Prattle said, sometimes it can be difficult based on the information officers receive, what kind of evidence we have. And so that is, it can be, it's an important consideration that we have to take and take very seriously. And then again, I will say we're working diligently with LPD, with code enforcement when they have questions, when there are things that can be clarified, to provide them with that clarification, to discuss maybe which parts of ordinances are applicable where, and in ways that they can easily disseminate to the officers so that everyone is, operating on the same information.
Okay, and I do have a question about submissible evidence, and this will be for both of you. So, with noise complaints, nuisance complaints, we've heard this with speeding complaints. An officer must witness this thing taking place in order to write a ticket or escalate the situation to the next level, whatever that may be. With the noise ordinance specifically, we did have a question earlier in public comment. Folks subscribe to Scram, and officers do use that type of video and recording when they're solving criminal cases. Is there any issue or risk to the city with accepting that type of documentation from a resident and using it when coming to a conclusion about a noise ordinance? What does that look like?
So, I can take the admissibility in court portion.
Sure.
To submit an item of evidence, or an item, let's say, into evidence, I have to be able to lay a foundation for it, which usually means I need the person who created it or who recorded it or whatever, however it was, if it's a document drafted, if it was a recording recorded. I'm going to need them to be able to be available to come in and to testify that, yes, this is the thing I recorded. This is when I recorded it. This is how I recorded it. And, potentially if we're talking about something like a decibel meter or something like that, we may need to introduce some sort of evidence of reliability. Something showing that that is a calibrated device, or that, I don't know if it would be, because I'm thinking about this off the top of my head, you might need someone from the app team to zoom in or something
An
like that.
expert to testify.
Exactly, to testify as to the general reliability of these things. So, I will say, there are things that are easier for the police to use in making a probable cause determination. They're harder to get into actual hard evidence when we get to court. Especially people, tend to get maybe a little hot about the neighbor's party one day. They make the recording, they send it in. It comes time for them to actually testify at trial. Now I don't really want to cooperate so much anymore. So that's really the big issue there, is foundation. When it comes to the writing of a citation.
I just want to ask a real quick question. So they would have to, you couldn't, as an example, accept, because I understand it's threatening to come to court, right, and testify in person. Is it a sworn affidavit?
Since it's criminal, it's a confrontation clause thing. They have to, the witness has to be present for the other side to cross-examine them.
And if you don't mind.
No, please.
And then the other piece is with the technology. What I really struggle with, and I think Chief Prattle is absolutely correct in that, it's vague. It talks about decibels. They don't have the tools out in the field to enforce this the way that it's in plain writing, right, meant to be enforced. And so it's either a committee working with you all, and obviously the LPD at this thing so that it's actually an enforceable tool. Or we ensure that our officers actually have the tools out in the field. And if it's an app, great. If it's reliable, but that they actually have that. So when you talk about admissibility and you talk about making sure that you can kind of establish this foundation, and you might have to bring somebody in, you might have to prove that it's been calibrated. You have to do the same thing with speeding tickets, correct? If that was to ever actually go into, yeah. So I mean, this isn't something that we don't do.
No,
Yeah.
no, it would just be something where we would need whatever the tool we were using to be that reliable.
Got it.
And to have those people accessible. So
Okay.
like, for example, with the breathalyzer, right, the roadside PBT test. Those companies, they know we're gonna get called all the time. We're gonna have to have people, whereas, if we're trying to use an app, it might have been made by two guys in a basement in San Diego. They may have no ability to do that. So that's just one of the.
We have some investigation to do, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
If I could just add, I find it hard to believe that LPD would just use an app created by two guys somewhere in a basement in California. Like, I would have to believe San Diego. I have to believe that our police chief, our assistant chief would be diligent in finding a tool that is widely used and accepted within law enforcement and with the legal community. So I understand that,
Yeah.
but I also feel like that shouldn't necessarily hinder us from doing our due diligence and seeing what is available out
Right,
there.
right.
What could we use? What additional tools? Especially if we're looking at something like an app that isn't necessarily an additional piece of equipment, but it complements the equipment we already have. Please.
Well, first it's San Diego. Second, so maybe I'm misreading this. The decibel reading is only under motor vehicles, correct?
Correct.
Because I think that what Allison is talking about doesn't mention anything about decibel noise, if I'm reading this correctly.
No, and I will say, right, specifically 654.07 sub A talks about something, much more measurable, but again, something we need to be able to prove, which is right between 11 and 7 to be plainly audible at a distance of 50 feet from the building.
So I would think like maybe if officers have phones, a recording of that sound from a distance would be.
Sure, or even I've seen body cam footage
Oh, yeah,
where it's
correct,
been
body
good enough to move forward. It's not that any of these are rare and that we haven't been able to approve charges or get convictions on them. It's just, again, needing to make sure we have everything in place, and if we're going to use tools, making sure those tools are reliable.
Right.
And if I may, Chair,
Please.
I think reading through this, it talks about a phonograph and other things. I think it's probably time to upgrade this a little bit, and maybe this is something the committee could work with OCA to clean this up. I think the other thing that it doesn't factor in are cars that have sound making devices on them, because that's 90% of my complaints are those typically Dodge Chargers that have is it the Scat Pack, I think, sounds like gunfire. It is alarmingly loud, and cars are getting louder and louder. There are, I did do, just so the committee's aware,
Mhm.
I dove into some of the noise ordinances in other cities. And I have some of the research I'd be happy to share. They did crack down on noise making devices and loud mufflers like that. And they were able to do that under Michigan law.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I would welcome that. Absolutely.
I'll be quiet now.
Councilmember Hussein, any additional?
The only thing is, yeah, I guess the only question on that is that I just want clarity in terms of what right now Chief Backus's internal policy in terms of cars and non-moving violations, right? So would we be writing something that internally you all wouldn't enforce anyway, because it's just not, I understand.
Okay. You
Does that make sense?
a good point, and something I really haven't considered that much, but it's, when it comes to noise, it is a quality of life issue. So I have to weigh whether the quality of life is more important to the general happiness of the entire city, and you want those traffic stops being done, or the actual traffic stop for noise is something that people are looking at as something they do not want to see their police spending time on. And that's not something that I've considered much, because I haven't had much feedback on that. I personally don't get a lot of emails or phone calls about music from cars anymore. the bass, and you name it. The exhaust, absolutely. So in terms of the noise from exhaust, we have been taking enforcement on that. We've seen people that have put their cars in different modes or made different modifications so that it sounds like gunfire. Because yeah, when they go through a neighborhood, it's everybody calling us. So I think if in that instance, it is worth the violation to make the traffic stop, to tell the person whatever modifications you've done to your car, not allowed. The noise is excessive. But in terms of people calling us and saying there's people driving by with loud music, that's not something that I've seen lately.
Any additional questions or comments on the noise
I
ordinance?
just think the chief is right. You know, the complaints, and you can see them in the neighborhood forums. It's always about muffler, the noise the car is emitting. It's never about music anymore. Because if that was true, all my neighbors would turn me in.
Sure, and I do think it has changed over time. I think you're right. Over the last, some of this predates my time on council. I vividly remember seeing a frustrated neighbor that had a concern with a dog who was left outside all hours of the day and night, and it absolutely affected their quality of life. I understand animal control would have to be involved, and there are different, nuances to that particular situation. But again, it speaks to neighbor, the noise level, what is the quality of life for the neighborhood overall, and how can we kind of wrap our arms around that? So I would absolutely appreciate a review and to work on this noise ordinance and make some meaningful changes there that reflect all of that.
And I think the other thing that should be said is, I know that a lot of the noise is not, something LPD can necessarily be everywhere all the time about. It's the construction of our streets and them being long, wide, and straight, and cars just cooking it. Because I can hear it from Saginaw, Oakland, Michigan, not so much right now, from my house. And that generally is the major complaint on the corridors is, the speeding, which I know that everyone is, you guys are working hard to try to address that, but you can't be everywhere all the time. So.
Any other questions or comments on the noise ordinance? Okay. Moving on to the LPD summer safety plan. If you would like to inform us of what this summer safety plan encompasses and how you're going to work throughout the city for the remainder of the summer.
Sure. So obviously, it's no secret that during the summer months, we experience higher call volumes. Unfortunately, violent crime tends to rise in the summertime. So it's no secret that we need to come up with some more proactive strategies to address this. So this year is no different. And these are things that we do already. This is just a good opportunity for us to pump up our efforts and highlight our efforts that our cops are already out there doing. So we've broken this down into somewhat of a community-driven, multi-efforted plan to not only hopefully reduce gun violence, but to promote overall safety with an engagement aspect of it as well. It can't be all about enforcement. There's got to be an engagement side to it as well. So specifically, we're going to really lean on our in-house specialty units to accomplish these. And we've broken these down into 5 different key initiatives. And you'll see that there's overwhelmingly more engagement than enforcement, but the 2 enforcement prongs I think are very important. So the first thing that we've broken this down to, the first initiative is what we're calling the Bike Patrol Blitz. So that's essentially throughout the summer months, our community services unit is picking different neighborhoods, not just those neighborhoods that have community officers assigned to them, all different neighborhoods to put our bikes out on bicycles again. We've over the years, we've been able to upgrade our bicycles and we're gonna use them now. So it's a great way to interface with the public is getting out on bikes. And you're able to maneuver around a little bit easier and be out of the big bulky patrol car. So to go along with that is our pop-up patrols. And we're taking the approach where our officers are kind of randomly and organically stopping into our local parks. And so we try not to, necessarily advertise all this. It could be our community service unit may get a phone call and hey, there's 20 kids out in Wainwright Park. Boom, we've got our CSU unit that can deploy immediately, go out there, set up tents, set up grills. We've got some games to play in the park, cornhole. We've got one of our officers that claims to be undefeated in a foot race. So he's been challenged quite frequently throughout the year. So obviously this just does more with face-to-face interactions. To go along with that is our walk and talks. And these ones are a little bit more difficult because it's simply putting our officers out on foot in the neighborhoods, right? Whether that be seeing somebody walking their dog or whether that be going up to somebody that's sitting on their porch or knocking on their door. And this is a good way for us to stay informed of different problems and community or quality of life issues that maybe people aren't calling the police on, but things that are going on in the neighborhoods that maybe we don't know about. This is our opportunity to find out about that. So,
When you said as part of the walk and talk, sometimes you do the knock and talk too.
correct.
Knock it on the, okay, cool.
Yep. The last two are more of our enforcement-based efforts. So this first one we're calling Night Watch. And so this effort is aimed at proactively addressing our hotspots. And obviously these hotspots can come identified from a variety of different ways. Obviously we use our data-driven efforts, right? So we're going to look at where the crime is occurring from our crime analysts. We're also going to take into consideration community input. Hey, we've had a issue in this neighborhood. Okay, well, we're going to direct some of our efforts towards that for enforcement purposes. And then everyone's favorite, the aggressive driving enforcement. Obviously, it's no secret to us that aggressive driving is an issue, and we are doing our best to deploy our officers in these high complaint zones for moving motor vehicle violations. And again, we use our data for this. So we've got our speed trailers that can record different data points on number of vehicles, speed, et cetera. So we'll lean heavily on our data where to deploy our resources to get the best efficiency out of it. And that's it. That's the 5 of them.
Very quickly before we move on, I do want to acknowledge that we have a member of the public with their hand raised. I'm sorry, but public comment has already passed, and so we have moved on the agenda. I believe I do have your contact information, and we'll follow up with you after this meeting. Please, with your question.
So this is all fantastic. Obviously, you know, I talk to officers in the field all the time. You guys are doing a great job. But we have never had, well, I don't want to say never, but we have incredibly, in my opinion, low staffing. And we have, you know, some 300 calls for service today. And so they are out there busting their tails. I remember I was actually in a meeting once where you said at one point we had anywhere from 16 to 32 officers out in the streets at any one given time. And now we're like 8 to 16. So I guess my question is, how are we doing all this with our current staffing? Are we approving overtime? Is there grant funding that's supporting additional overtime? I mean, how are we staffing?
So we were able to set aside some grant funds for overtime efforts for each one of these initiatives.
And then how are we, if you don't mind,
No, please.
with regards to, I think our community service unit, I think they do an incredible job. But we also know a lot of times that when we see vacancy, those are a lot of times vacant. Those positions, how are we doing with that unit right now in terms of, so what do we have that's actually funded? And then what do we have that's actually staffed?
So we still have 12 spots. 5 of them are filled right now. If you put me on the spot to name all 5, I'm not sure that I could, but I could get that back to you. I know that.
Are those prioritized at all? Those 12? Okay.
Yes.
No, but I mean, are they almost like rank ordered based on, because we know that of the 12, maybe we have one that's just, I mean, absolutely critical. Maybe it's the Risdale area where I live, right? I don't know. Based on data, real-time data.
I 100% go back to the crime data.
Okay.
Were those prioritized on ranks and community input, right? We can't lose sight of that. So the data and community input when it comes to filling those spots. And I would dare to say some of those spots probably need to be revisited on some lines. I mean, take our Jolly and Waverly CPO area. Now that, you know, the west side of Waverly is no longer has people living over there, does that need to shift over and incorporate more of the Wainwright neighborhood?
Right.
Can we combine Rio Risdale and Jolly Waverly and make that maybe just a little bit larger of a CPO area?
Yeah, it's actually, it's Kalamazoo, Potter Walsh, Baker Denora, downtown and south side, which looks like Southwest Lansing. That are the zones that have current officers with South Washington, Rio, Risdale, Jolly, Genesee, Old Town and North Town. Right now. I just want to, say that I actually have witnessed a lot of this, moving of the cameras, things like that, that have tamped down some of that crime. I appreciate that we had, issues in the first ward with different businesses running parties. That officer that's quote undefeated, I might have did a ride along with, who was doing a lot of these things, and I have video to prove that he was defeated by a child. I was there. But I see the night watch, the proactive hotspots. I mean, without saying anything and just being an observer in the car, that was the first thing we did, was we checked all the hotspots. We got out of the car, we talked to folks that are, maybe running security there or gonna be at the event. What's going on tonight? How many people do you expect? What time are you done? We were back there when they were done, just to make sure everything was calm. I see the benefits of a lot of these things happening. So I do appreciate all of that information. And like I said, I got to see it firsthand, and it's good to see. And it's good to see the pop-ups in the neighborhoods. I love the idea of reaching out to the community. I think a lot of times people kind of pull back or think, that's the LPD car. But to see, people on bikes, to see them out, BSing with the kids, throwing cornhole or barbecuing is great. And I think that's the best way to do policing, is when you're doing community policing like that.
Please.
Yeah, I totally agree. Who's the officer for Potter Walsh?
It's Washington.
Yeah, incredible. He does an incredible job. Just the way he engages people, the kids, the incredible job. They also have a portable basketball hoop now. They take that around. It's very, very great reviews from the community. I had a couple other questions. With regard to our traffic unit or our motorcycle unit, that's data-driven and community input as well, right? How are we doing with that unit in terms of actual staffing? Because I've heard a lot of different things.
So right now it's staffed by a sergeant. We have 3 officers assigned to it. So right now there's.
Didn't we at one point have, I thought at one point we had like 7. Is that not the?
Over Chief and I's career, I can remember 10 or 15.
Even. So we're down to sergeant and 3 positions. Wow.
With 1 open. So we have a sergeant, 3 officers that are staffed right now, 1 position.
Okay, so there's 4. Okay, I got you. And then I did have a question, and I'm sorry, I was writing questions down and checking them off when I asked them. I wanted to go back just real quick, if that's okay with the red tag. HRCS, when you guys have actually had to, nights and weekends, you've actually had to make that call. Pretty responsive. I mean, are they out there?
Trying to think of the last time I remember one. I feel like it was for a fire displacement, and I do believe that they were, but can't remember how long ago that actually was.
One thing to note is, like, our social workers, that's kind of our first line. We'll go to them first.
Right.
And then they have a better handle on what resources are where. But we have HRCS, the after hours. I know we still use it. We've done so well with our own people.
That's fair. Thank you.
Okay. Just to reiterate what we've already heard, fantastic job in the community space. I can't tell you how many events I've attended, festivals, things I've gone to, and LPD is always there. If you're not just kind of walking around and greeting people, there's an actual display, a tent, a table where you're handing out ice cream and engaging with kids and really just building that trust. And I love seeing that. I like, giving away the stickers, doing all of those things to just really connect. And I think it's incredibly meaningful. So I can only reiterate what you've already heard on those efforts. So thank you. Anything more on the summer safety plan? All right, moving along, and I guess, maybe we can combine these last 2 because they go hand in hand, right? We've seen some data, and statistics recently about gun violence in general throughout the city. The last update I had, covered part of, it was pre 4th of July weekend. And so, if we're thinking June moving into July, public safety overall, including gun violence, fatal and non-fatal, what does that look like today?
So to talk about the gun violence specifically, we do get busier. June, July, and August. We pay really close attention to not only what's happening during these months, but how does it compare to our previous summers too? Because we want to be able to catch our trends really fast. And so one of the things that we saw leading up to the 4th of July was very concerning. We saw 3 non-fatal shootings and a fatal shooting. And that was brought to the community's attention in some of our public meetings that we've had. And we're pretty open with saying that, in some cases, it's because of a certain area, and we'll tell people exactly what we're doing in that area. But at the same time, we're throwing that out to other community groups saying, what can you do in this area? And the response that we got last week was overwhelming from what people were doing to engage communities in a positive way, especially some of the youth, to make sure that there was a presence of people who were activating the space, who were mindful of what had happened, but were there to prevent further things from happening. And that goes such a long way for us to be able to do our job, not only investigating the crimes that have happened, but being just a calming presence to deter people from anything future. I mean, that's partnership to me. So I talked about the 3 non-fatal shootings and the fatal shooting leading up to the 4th of July, and I had serious concerns of what we were about to face. But I'm happy to report that from the 29th all the way to the 6th, from the 29th to July 6th, we had no fatal or non-fatal shootings. So we were very hot, but from everybody's interactions, I think we cooled things right off. But that led into a couple instances that happened Monday and Tuesday. Just to go over those really quick. On Sunday at 2:13 in the morning, we had a non-fatal shooting in the 200 block of East Cesar Chavez. So we've learned from our investigation and from talking to some neighborhood people that the city parking lot might have become that new popular spot where people are hanging out after hours. We've already dealt with a place over that used to be Cedar and Mount Hope. That's calmed down. It was Hosmer. That's calmed down. So now perhaps this is the next place that we need to have a presence. So that shooting, it's always an unfortunate incident, but it's always an opportunity for us to make sure that whatever transpired there, that it doesn't get worse. And so we were also able to find out, though, through our investigation, that really the victim in that case, they were probably just wrong place, wrong time. They were doing everything right. There was nothing wrong they were doing. There was probably unintended target. So we're still working through the suspects in that. We have some people identified who we think might have been involved in an altercation, but we're not at a point where we can actually even come close to charging people. Like, this is where we have to get cooperation from witnesses, find video, things of that nature, so that we can bring whoever's accountable, whoever's responsible for this, to hold them accountable for the female who was shot. And then more importantly, the shooting that we had this morning at 3:40 a.m. in the 400 block of South Francis. That was a drive-by shooting where the round actually went into the house and struck a 10-year-old. And she's in stable condition, but also in this case, we're relying on witnesses and video to try to determine who was around that time and speaking to the family of who might be responsible. So right now, we don't have any identified suspects in that case, but this is still early. And this is the one that a 10-year-old being shot, this is the one that people need to pay attention to. This is the one people need to step up and help us. I already know that the people have stepped up to help the family. That we've already seen, we've already communicated with. They're getting good resources from our partners. Now we need to be able to do our job on the criminal side too, which is finding out why this happened and who's responsible for it.
And if I could just ask a question, I know that as you receive more information, the public receives new and updated information. So can you speak to how quickly you push this information out publicly, let's say to news sources, with the preliminary information, and then, your fact finding and investigation leads you to further details and how that can change over time? How soon do you alert the public when an instance like this occurs?
Sure. So usually when the incident happens, we're getting calls from the media almost immediately. Sometimes they're on scene in recording. So our sergeants who are on scene are going to give a brief update on what's transpired. We have a non-fatal shooting, where the location is, what time it happened, and usually what the extent of the injuries are. So that goes out immediately. If there's any other information that we can release, for example, if we say that there's no threat to the public, without getting into the details of what people have specifically said to the police department, what we've determined is this was not a random event and this was a targeted action. That's the way that we are looking at the incident that happened this morning, that this was a targeted action. And that's why in our release, we said that there is no perceived threat to the public. Now, again, it feels a little bit like we're not being 100% honest, because when you have someone who's committed this crime and they're still outstanding, there is some type of general threat, but we want to convey to people, this was a targeted event. Well, when we get new information, how we release that is when it comes to a point when the information is something that we don't need to hold for our investigation, it's okay to release to the public. It's not going to inhibit our investigative efforts at all, then we'll gladly put it out there. That includes suspect information, vehicle information, weapon information, anything that we can give to give people a better idea of what this event looked like.
Thank you for that. Questions from committee members?
So cool down, I guess, and I guess I understand like Hosmer has cooled down. But Cedar and Mount Hope was banging this weekend
Was it?
at that liquor store gas station. There were 2 officers when there was one behind me that was waiting to come in and there was another one coming in, I think, to break it up. So I guess what is the criteria when stuff cools down? Is it just that we don't see those crowds anymore that are there? I realize that this, as soon as it cools down, it warm right back up.
Yeah.
But do we have like a criteria where we say, that's no longer a focus point?
No, it just goes by if we're getting calls on it. Like, for example, what you're telling me right now is not something that hit my radar from this weekend. Is something that we had to pay specific attention to. So I'll have to ask and see, how big was this crowd? What were they doing? What were their behaviors? Because in the past, what we've done, we've gone right to the business owners and said, like, how do you feel about this activity? Are you allowing it to go on? Do you not want it to happen? Do you need us to step in? And then there comes a point for a business that says, if certain behaviors are happening, that's actually unallowable behavior. For example, you can't let people drink in your parking lot, consume alcohol in your parking lot. Those are violations. And it's not only going to be a violation for the people, it's going to affect negatively on you because you have an alcohol license and you're responsible to liquor control. So that usually gets some cooperation with them saying, okay, this group, we don't want them here. We don't want anybody drinking in our parking lot.
I don't know that the liquor control is going to be any ally to help us with anything here, but the other question I had, or actually a thank you, was on Hosmer. I just briefly went over it. That was something we were getting letters about. People were very upset. It has been quiet. I haven't heard or seen anything. And I drive by there 8 times a day at least. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate LPD's willingness to move those cameras around. When we ask and we see that happen, because those really do change, I think, the dynamics of a situation, especially with, specifics to Hosmer there. I really did think with that Cedar Mount Hope putting in that gas station would stop the parking lot parties, but now they're just, 3 deep at the pump, which is just wild to me. But and I appreciate the work on the shooting, because that did happen around the corner from me. So I very much appreciate the update on that as well.
Has there been any, you guys are doing really good things and, really appreciated your update last week at LEN. And I think some of the interruptions, some of the prevention, some of the enforcement, it's like you said, it's faceted at this point. And it's certainly paying dividends throughout the city of Lansing. Have we looked at other cities that are mid-sized in kind of the fashion that we are across kind of the country, and their data? What we're seeing in terms of these decreases, is it very similar? Are we kind of outpacing other communities our size?
It's all over the place. Like I look at Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo's not too different than us, similar size department. They had an increase in gun violence last year, but we had a 20% decrease in our non-fatal shootings. So it's something like the culture really drives it. And I don't know, the police are responding to it, but they had just a set of circumstances where I think it was feuding groups, if I remember correctly, that just escalated everything and it just started driving their numbers up. So with us, when we talk about this stuff at LEN, it is looking at the retaliation, it's looking at who's behind it, it's looking at the area that's happening, and just trying to make sure that this isn't a pattern that we develop or we identify weeks later. Like, we need to identify it day one, week one, so that we can have a response to it. And that's when Chief Brattle's talking about the strategies. Every week they're talking about where the patterns are, and every Friday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you've got a group of people that are going out specifically to those areas.
Any other questions or comments on the overall public safety throughout the city or statistics?
Is there anybody at this table that knows where we're at? I haven't been following real well, but where we're at the state level with the public safety revenue sharing bill?
What I understand right now is, I think, and forgive me if I've gotten it wrong, the House had one version of the bill and it went to the Senate. The Senate's changed it, and I'm not sure where that's at yet. So it's whether the amount was decreased or what the spending was for. So there's not a final version of it yet. But I can tell you that in either version, there's money that's going to be put towards actually funding and hiring officers, but it's very specific to your level of violent crime. You need to make progress in reducing your violent time if you take or they award you any funds.
Okay. So we will reach out to our partners in the state legislature to find out where we're at. Thank you.
Can I touch on one other thing? So just talk about the overall health of the city. So again, when we talk about some of the violent crime that has happened in the past 2 weeks, I still want to let people know that we're 6 months into this year. And as of right now, we have a 55% decrease in homicides over last year, a 20% decrease in rapes at this time last year, 53%.
Can you stop? What was that one?
Rape.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
53% decrease in arsons, 21% decrease in burglaries, 16% decrease in larcenies, and a 27% decrease in vehicle theft. And I should also put out there that our non-fatal shootings are a 20% decrease, 26% decrease.
Sorry, I'm just thank
Go
you
ahead.
for covering those items because that was my next question. What about, burglaries, arson, a variety of other
Yeah.
issues that folks face. So thank you for information on that. Please.
I'll just,
So is there any outlier, Chief Backus? Is there anything that we've actually seen an increase in?
Yeah. So our felonious assaults are up 41%. And I'll tell you, one of the difficult things about what our numbers are for felonious assault is that a felonious assault is qualified as an assault which results in an injury that requires hospital care. There's a lot of times that we will qualify something as a felonious assault because when we take the report, someone is sent to the hospital for treatment of their injuries. When the prosecutor looks at that case, they also look at the medical records, and sometimes they only charge a simple assault because what was on its face a serious injury ended up not being as serious, because we don't ever tell somebody you're not going to go to the hospital. Someone gets assaulted, they say they're injured, we bring a medic in and they go. So these numbers, when I say there's a 41% increase, we actually have to go case by case to see what was the final charge on these.
And do these tend to be domestic disputes?
That you do see them there, but I mean, I'm not going to say the overwhelming majority is. Probably 50-50.
Let me ask this. When you look at the crime mapping, weekly, there's clearly a pattern of where these happen. I mean, you can drill it down almost to certain areas where even though the crimes are going down, they're still being committed in the same areas. So would you say that some people could feel that with where they live, and I understand the numbers are down, but if it's the same neighborhood as happening to over and over again, I could see a world where they would still think crime hasn't gotten any better in our area.
Yeah, sure. There's always a perception, and sometimes perception is reality, and we have to fight that. But one of the things that we do in our crime meetings, which I think is just as important as looking at our hotspots, we look at frequent calls for service and frequent offenders for areas of focus. So when you talk about those certain areas, it's not just the idea that we want to focus on where crime is happening. We want to find out who is responsible for the crime in that area. We also want to find out if there's disproportionate crime related to one address, because we don't want to just send a cop in there and say, these 4 blocks, 0 tolerance. You don't make friends doing that. It's not the kind of policing that we need. You need focused, just laser focused attention to who and what the problem is. When you talk about that, I think that most people may say, yes, there's still crime in my area. My next question is, do you know who's responsible for it and where it's happening? Because that's where we need to be at.
I appreciate that. And I'm sure that it's difficult to get people to talk. I mean, you know, I think there was violence in years past where, you know, people just wouldn't talk, and that just continues the issue.
Yeah, that's true. And it doesn't just hinder an investigation. I mean, you can have people pull back from testifying, right? Once they engage at the, level with the prosecutors. So it's nuanced. We appreciate your efforts. If there are no other questions or comments, I thank you both greatly for being here today. Really appreciate all of the information that you had to share. We look forward to seeing the officers in the community and staying informed on the statistics as we move throughout the rest of the summer. So thank you very much. It is 5:06 and our meeting is adjourned.